Revelation 12, 1 and 2. And I saw a great sign in the heavens. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. Being pregnant, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. This great sign occurs on the Feast of Trumpets, an appointed time awaiting its prophetic fulfillment. This sign will occur on September 23rd, 2017. Far and away, the greatest question that I receive since finding this sign that happens in 2017 and putting it on the internet is, what does it mean? Since it is a prophecy in the book of Revelation, and prophecies are meant to be fulfilled. What does it mean? So I made videos about it, 2011, 12, 13, 14, and I posted my speculations on it. I shared it, I explained it, I opened it up. But some details of my theory, my ideas of what it might mean, didn't come to pass. Sometimes a good theory, a great theory, looks fantastic on paper, but doesn't quite turn out the way that you think it should. And that's why there's the scientific method, which means that you go back to the drawing board. So lately, the biggest question that I have been receiving by far is, now what do you think? And so I've been looking at it more and more and more, since it's a big deal to me. It's kind of my baby. And I've got some new ideas. Again, I want you to know that my speculation is just that. I'm not a prophet, and I don't claim to be. But I want to look at this in light of the time that we're in. Anytime that somebody's looking at something, at what might happen in the future, you're only looking from your vantage point, and information can change, and then your vantage point can change in time. Just like people speculating on election outcomes, sport outcomes, there's variables, things change, and doesn't make you a prophet or a false prophet if you're not right about that. So keep in mind, this is just speculation. However, this is a prophecy that is in Scripture, and it is coming, and it means something. So let's take a look at that. Are you ready? This is going to be your time not to browse the internet, so sit back, and I think that you're going to get something out of this. Thanks for watching. Here we go. So let's start at the beginning. I'm going to tell you again how I stumbled across this constellation and planet alignment that looks very much like what is written in the book of Revelation during the tribulation period. It all started with a DVD that I got. It was a 2007 DVD. It came out in 2007, called The Star of Bethlehem. I think I got my copy in 2008, and it was a gentleman who decided to find the Star of Bethlehem, and so he went into an astronomy program to go back into the past and to search that out. And I found that very compelling, just the way that he went about that research. So what I did was I couldn't afford the software that he was using, but I found a software online that was free to download and use, and I think it's fairly accurate. And many people use it, and it's called Stellarium. And so I downloaded that, and I just went through the DVD point by point just to learn how to use the software and to just really look at what he did. And so that was in 2008. I got on YouTube at that time as well, but I wasn't a video maker. I didn't have software. My laptop actually could kind of barely even handle the astronomy software, and had Windows 2000 on it, and died shortly thereafter. I wasn't making YouTube videos. At most, I would just post myself with a cheap little camera that I would just play worship songs with an acoustic guitar and that kind of a thing. But I was not making videos like this where I could edit. I didn't have the tools. So I wasn't much of a YouTuber. Didn't have any subscribers. But in 2008, 2009, 2010. 11, I would hang out in certain forums that talk about end-time events. And I've been studying Bible prophecy since the 80s when I was in high school, reading Hal Lindsey, Jack Van Impe, and Grant R. Jeffries, and so many others. So I've always been interested in Bible prophecy as long as I can remember, really. But in these forums, somebody had, and this is after I had the Stellarium and knew about the Star of Bethlehem DVD, and somebody posted a screenshot and said it was the Revelation 12 sign. It was a screenshot from the software, and I recognized it because it was the same images, and so I looked at this person's post and the image that was given, and it really intrigued me, and I looked at it, and I read the scripture again, and it just didn't seem to jive with me. So I went into my software, and knowing that the book of Revelation from chapter 4 forward through 22 is all yet future, I just started going into the future. And the woman, Virgo, is always clothed in the sun in the fall. And so you can kind of narrow it down to the fall. The sign always happening in the fall. The woman's always clothed in the sun in the fall. So that was pretty simple. I would just go to the fall and find the woman clothed in the sun, and then find when the moon is at her feet, and the moon always passes her feet at some point, because that's the new moon time. And so that was easy enough to find. Each month I did, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017. And I hit 2017, and I saw this alignment, and I thought that's pretty interesting. I make a note of that. 2018, 2019, 2020, 21, 22, 23. I think I went into the 30s, and then I said, this is getting ridiculous, because I kind of think that the end times are a little sooner than that. So I went back to 2017, and I really kind of studied it out. And then what I did was, vaguely studied it out. Then I took a screenshot, and I posted it. And in a forum, and it got some attention, and some people who were YouTubers who they saw it as well. It just started getting around, and then within a matter of weeks, people were posting in the forum videos about it. And I said, wait a second. And of course they didn't mention me, because who am I? I'm nobody. I have no subscribers. I'm not a YouTuber, really. And so I said, well, you know what? I gotta make videos, I guess. And so I ended up figuring out that after, I don't know, some amount of time, weeks, months. But I finally put up my first video in sort of early 2011, and that's how it kind of really started to take off from there. And then I kept studying it. I kept learning a little bit more, and so I would make another video and another video and another video. And that's how my subscriber base really kind of started, is because of that. And then, of course, I didn't even really take the Revelation 12 sign seriously, because, I kind of believed it, kind of didn't. I was just kind of like, me, I'm going to find it right. So I was actually far more interested in the blood moons at the time, because Mark Biltz found the blood moon tetrad patterns, released that in 2008, and I just found that more interesting. It was just a bigger deal to me. However, with that backstory, I want to show you my first theory that once I made a timeline with my friend Mike Rogers, which we kind of stole the idea from Luis Vega, is to put all the eclipses in a line. Thanks, Lou. And I'm very visual, and once I saw that, I saw Luis Vega's chart. I said, "Wow, that's look at that! All the blood moons and all the eclipses, and you could really see that." And so with my friend Mike Rogers, I didn't have Photoshop. I didn't know how to do graphics or anything like that. All this stuff that I do now is like pretty new in the last 5 years. And so we made some early charts, again, sort of copying Luis Vega's charts. And then what I ended up doing is I ended up putting the Revelation 12 sign on the chart. And then once looking at that, I thought, whoa, here's maybe something. Let's, So I want to show you what I did, because my theory formed based on the sight of the timeline with the tetrad and the Revelation 12 sign, if in fact it's that, what happens in 2017 and what happens in 2014 and 2015, the tetrad. So let me go back and I'll show you what I saw and then how my theory developed on that, and then I'm going to tell you why it didn't work, and then I'm going to show you what are my thoughts next. I put the Revelation 12 sign on this chart. Again, the blood moon tetrad is here, and where John mentions the Revelation 12 sign is in, Revelation 12, but in Revelation 11, 12, and 13, he mentions by number the numbers 3.5 years numerous times, that the two witnesses are killed in Revelation 11 after they have had a ministry for 3.5 years. The woman here is escapes to the wilderness to be protected for 3.5 years. So there's 3.5 years prior and 3.5 years after that. Also, that the Antichrist is going to be given power for 3.5 years. That's in Revelation 11, 12, and 13. So by number, I think about 4 times. I've made these videos that really opened it up already. Revelation 11, 12, and 13 all describe mid-tribulation events. And so when I noticed that September of 2017, if you count back 1 September in 2016, that's 1 year. Another September in 2015, that's 2 years. Another September in 2014, that's 3 years. And then you go to the spring, that's 3.5 years. And that just happens to begin this tetrad. So 3.5 years. So to me, that was pretty interesting, because John mentions in the middle of the tribulation chapters numerous times that there's 3.5 years prior to when he's writing about those events, and 3.5 years after that. So I made this chart, and green here is 3.5 years before the sign, this sign. Yellow is the sign, this arrow, and then 3.5 years after the sign. Okay, I'm just studying. I'm not trying to, I wasn't trying to make people believe that the tribulation was going to begin in 2014 when the first blood moon hit. That was never my intention. I've never said that. But I think what happens with certain videos and graphics is people will see things. And there are people today, and I kind of blame myself for this. There are people today in this community that think that we're in the tribulation period right now. And that think that somehow near that beginning of the tetrad that the tribulation began. And it did not. It's very clear how the tribulation begins, and that's with a peace agreement by a world leader who is the Antichrist, a peace agreement between Israel and the other nations, and we know there's no peace. So that clearly hasn't happened. On top of that, the rapture has to happen before he's even revealed. So we're not in the tribulation period. Some people believe that we are. Some people make charts and all kinds of stuff, and I can only imagine that, I was the first person to put that out there, and I never said it directly, but people, I think, took away that, and I'm sorry. And so that's kind of why I want to clear this up. We're not in the tribulation period. The tribulation did not begin at the tetrad. It's a sign. They're all signs. Joel writes, he says that the sun will go dark and the moon will turn to blood before the day of the Lord. Before. So this is before. And I think these two eclipses here might be those very things that Joel writes in Joel 2:31. So this was my first chart, of which people have been asking me, because here we are over here right now, and so how could this be the middle of the tribulation if we're not in the tribulation period? Well, that's what I want to clear up. I think I'm looking at it in a different way now. Let's take a look at that. It's this chart that I believe a lot of the questions come from, because this chart is an old chart before the tetrad happened in 2014 and 2015 in some of my older videos, where I said that Revelation 12 is mid-trib. And this sign happens in 2017 in the fall. So the idea is, well, then the Feast of Trumpets in 2017 would be a mid-trib time period, because Revelation 11, 12, and 13 clearly describe the mid-tribulation events, as Revelation has an overall chronological outline. Not everything in the book of Revelation is mentioned like word for word chronologically, but it has an outline of a beginning, a middle, and an end. The church age is mentioned 19 times in chapters 2 and 3. It's church, and then the church isn't mentioned anymore. The rapture seems to occur in chapter 4. The church is seen wearing crowns and white in chapters 4 and 5, casting crowns at the throne, at the feet of the Lamb, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, Yeshua. And they're wearing crowns because the Bema Seat judgment has happened. Nobody has crowns yet, because that award ceremony hasn't happened. So what's John looking at? He's looking at the church, and they clearly say, those 24 elders clearly say that they have been redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Who's that? That's people. That's Christians. So the church is in heaven in chapters 4 and 5, and then Yeshua takes the scroll and he starts breaking the seals in chapter 6, which is when the tribulation begins. And then around 11, 12, and 13, that's when all the mid-trib events are being described. And then chapter 19 is the second coming to earth. His feet touch the Mount of Olives. He comes back to Jerusalem, sets up a millennial kingdom. So there's an overall chronological outline. However, there are things in the book that need to be looked into, because some are prophecies of the future and some are looking back at the past. I said Revelation 12 is mid-trib, and so this gives the idea that you count 3.5 years back, and maybe the rapture and the tribulation would begin over here. That cannot. This is where my hypothesis is not correct anymore, because time has proven that it's not, and that's okay. So we go back to the drawing board and we try to look closer at what's going on. What was John really writing? What was his writing style? What was he trying to convey the way that he was writing? Because this scenario doesn't work anymore. It was a great idea on paper. It was a good theory back this direction, 2011, 12, and 13. It's the first thing you think of, and you have no reason to really change it until time makes you change it. So that's what this video is for, to answer the question, why did John mention this sign in the chapters of all the mid-tribulation events? But it can't be, because we're not in the tribulation now. Here we are right here at the time of this video, and the tribulation is a 7-year period. This can't be mid-trib here, when this sign actually literally occurs in the heavens. So what's the answer? Here's my idea. I want to show you something interesting in the chapter prior to the chapter that the Revelation 12 sign is mentioned in. Revelation 11. We're going to look at the writing style that John chooses to use to explain the ministry of the two witnesses. I was given a reed like a measuring rod and was told, "Go and measure the temple of God and the altar with its worshippers. But exclude the outer court. Do not measure it, because it has been given to the Gentiles. They will trample on the holy city," that's Jerusalem, "for 42 months. Right there is a mention of the latter 3.5 years. "And I will appoint my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days. That is a mention of the prior 3.5 years of the 7-year tribulation period. They'll be clothed in sackcloth. They are the two olive trees, the two lampstands, and they stand before the Lord of the earth. If anyone tries to harm them, fire comes out of their mouths and devours their enemies. This is how anyone who wants to harm them must die. They have power to shut up the heavens so that it will not rain during the time they are prophesying, and they have the power to turn waters into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they want." This would be happening if the tribulation were in effect right now. Is this happening? No. Now, when they have finished their testimony, that's their ministry of, as it says, 1,260 days, the first part of the 7-year tribulation period, when they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes up from the abyss, that's the Antichrist, will attack them and overpower and kill them. Their bodies will lie in the public square of the great city, Jerusalem, which is figuratively called Sodom and Egypt, where also Yeshua was crucified. For 3.5 days, there's that number again, 3.5. Some from every people, tribe, language, and nation will gaze on their bodies and refuse them burial. The inhabitants of earth will gloat over them and will celebrate by sending each other gifts, because these two prophets had tormented those who live on the earth. So, John is writing about the murder of the two witnesses in the middle of the tribulation period, clearly given by the numbers here. But after 3.5 days, there's the number again, but it's days this time. The breath of life from God entered them, and they stood on their feet. And terror struck those who saw them. Then they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, "Come up here." And they went up to heaven in a cloud while their enemies looked on. That's how Yahweh calls his chosen ones up. It's just like the rapture right there, but it's not the rapture, because we're not talking about the church. We're just talking about two witnesses. But that's how they go up. That's how Yeshua went up as well, in a cloud, when he ascended to heaven after being on the earth for 40 days after his resurrection. So that's what this is. Again, it's a death, it's a refusal of burial, and a resurrection, and then a calling up to heaven. What is interesting about this is that we know from the numbers, the two witnesses had a ministry of prophesying for 1,260 days, 3.5 years. But this is the first mention of them. The first time that he mentioned the two witnesses is in the middle of the tribulation. Just tells the whole story right there. He could have started in Revelation 6 at the beginning of the tribulation period and said, "And then the two witnesses came out, and their ministry was to do this for 3.5 years. And I'll tell you when we get to Revelation 11 about their murder." He didn't do that. He just completely, he just brushed over the whole ministry of the two witnesses until the 11th chapter, and then told the whole story. That's a certain writing style. He just chose to tell it there. However, it began 3.5 years prior to that. And that was the beginning of that chapter. Right here in the beginning of the next chapter, Revelation 12, he writes, "A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth," as you saw at the beginning of this video. Now, what if and I can't prove this, but this is my thought. You've asked. What if he's using the same type of writing style here? And he mentions this sign. However, just like the two witnesses, it actually happened it began, I should say, 3.5 years prior to his actual written mention of it. So what I'm saying here is this sign, clearly written in the book of Revelation within the tribulation period chapters, is unquestionably a tribulation sign. No question. Now, if what is found in 2017 on September 23rd, if this is, and I think it has very compelling evidence to be this actual thing, as I've shown in other videos, all the details, which I didn't do in this video. The sign is clearly a tribulation sign. So, if his writing style that he used in Revelation 11 is the same as his writing style that he's using in Revelation 12 here, that means that he mentions the sign 3.5 years late. Just like he mentioned the two witnesses 3.5 years at the end of their ministry, but he could have mentioned it at the beginning. He could have mentioned the Revelation 12 sign at the beginning of the tribulation period. It's clearly a tribulation sign. So, my thought, subject to change, is that this is a sign of the beginning of the tribulation period. And I say that cautiously, my friends. Do not quote me on saying that this sign, that 2017 is definitely the beginning of the tribulation period. Scotty said so. I cannot prove this. The numbers going backwards are not here. The numbers going forwards are here. It says in verse 5, she gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule the nations with an iron scepter. And that's how he rules and reigns in the millennium period. And her child, this is again the Messiah, this is Yeshua, was snatched up to God and to his throne. The woman, that's Israel, fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. That's the last part of the tribulation period. And this alludes right back to, John is basically confirming exactly what Yeshua said when he told the Jews. He said, when you see the abomination that causes desolation, standing where it ought not, then flee to the mountains. Flee to the hills, and we believe that's Petra. Yeshua said that. And this confirms it. Israel is to flee to the mountains for the latter half of the tribulation period, where they'll be protected because they have to repopulate the millennium period. And these are Jews who will have come to a belief in Yeshua as Messiah because of the two witnesses. I want to leave you with this. This is something I find interesting. If we look at the rest of the sign that I usually mention is just verses 1 and 2 of Revelation 12. Because in 3 here, he goes into another sign. Another side appearing in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads. He goes into something else. 3 and 4 talks about a different sign. But in verse 5, he continues with the sign of the woman and the child. It says, she gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule the nations with an iron scepter. Her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. It's interesting that this term right here, snatched up, is harpazo. If we go down to Revelation 12:5, This is harpazo. Her child was caught up, or it could be snatched up, caught up. It's the same thing. But this is, harpazo is the Greek word of which we get the word rapture from. In this parallel Bible, which I have the NIV up here, it says her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. If I go over to the Latin Vulgate, this is Latin, but where snatched up is, it says raptus. Raptus is where we get our word rapture. So I find it interesting that by word mention, the usage of the word which we get rapture from is used in this very sign. So technically, you could say that the rapture is connected to the Revelation 12 sign. It doesn't say that the church was raptured here. It says that the child was caught up to God in his throne, and that technically happened when he ascended to heaven after his resurrection. But it could have used other word usage. It used rapture, harpazo in the Greek, caught up, snatched up. And that's the very word that's in the rapture passages, harpazo, rapture. If you read 2 Corinthians 12, there's a story where Paul himself talks about himself in the third person, and he says that he was raptured. He was caught up to heaven so that he could learn all the things that he would teach the church, because he was downloaded with mysteries like the rapture itself, which was a mystery until Paul revealed it. And he writes, he was talking about himself. He says, such a man was caught up to the third heaven. Caught up. This is harpazo. And then this is in verse 2. And then in verse 4, he says it again about himself, was caught up into paradise. And then a famous rapture passage, 1 Thessalonians 4:17, again, it's harpazo in the Greek. It says that those who are alive and remain will be caught up together to meet Yeshua in the clouds. These are rapture descriptions here. And it just so happens that it's also in the book of Revelation, this word, right here, caught up to God. Something interesting. Nothing to make a doctrine about, but I just find it interesting. And the tribulation, it's clearly a tribulation sign, which if Paul was using the kind of writing style, he may be talking about the beginning, but he mentions it in the middle, just like the two witnesses. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching my videos. Thank you guys for supporting what I do. I will see you in the next video. You can click above my head to see my last prophecy autopsy video on finding the Feast of Trumpets, or click this box to see the last song that I just wrote. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.